During this tutorial, you're going to learn how to create a simple, customizable collage in either Photoshop or Photopea. Photopea is browser-based, so it will work on a PC, a Mac, or a Chromebook. And if you do have Photoshop, the steps to create the collage are the exact same. I hope you enjoy this. So I'm going to get started with my collage here in Photopea. The steps in Photoshop are the exact same. So let's go ahead and go up to File. And to create a new document, we just click New. And there's a bunch of templates in here in Photopea that we can choose from. There are social templates, print templates, photo templates, so on and so forth. Depending on what you want to use this project for, that will basically dictate which template you're going to select. So let's say you're going to create an Instagram post. Click on social, click the Instagram. This one's actually a really good one, the 1080 by 1080, and then you can work with that format. In this case, we're going to stick with print, and we're going to select letter in case we want to print these. Let's say letter size, so 8.5 by 11. So after I select letter, I click Create, and my blank template shows up here in my viewport. Now, to select images to work with, I'm just going to do some basic layer concepts here. So we can go about that in a few different ways, and I'll go over those. But let's first talk about the background. Okay, so rather than just having a white background, plain white background, we can do a few things to this background. The simplest thing is to go up here into these two tools, and by the way, all of these tools with a little check in the lower right hand side, as I click on those and hold, you can see that there are other tools underneath them. So I'm going to go back to this one, and these two tools work pretty well for this. There's a paint bucket tool. If I select the paint bucket tool and click on that background with this color selected, it's going to fill in that background with that color. I can also go up here and click and hold and grab this gradient tool by clicking on it. When I do that, and I can drop this little menu down up here in the upper left hand corner, there's a bunch of different gradients that I can select from. And the one that I have selected right now shows that this gradient is going to go from a blue over to a white, so it'll look a little bit more like the sky. So as I drag down across the top of my background and release, it will create that gradient for me. I can change the background colors or the gradient colors by clicking on this top or bottom portion of this palette down here. So if I want a darker blue, I can select this darker blue and click OK, and it shows up down here in this lower portion of the gradient. So now when I drag across this, it goes from a light blue to a dark blue. And then I can flip-flop that or change it any way that I want. So I'm just going to select this light blue here to start with, and I'll select a white here with my color picker. And by the way, you can change the color and the hues right here with this little slider too. So I'll click OK, drag across from top to bottom, and drop in my gradient. So now I've got a background started, and I'm going to go ahead and import some images to start to arrange my collage. Now you can do that one of a few different ways. If you're working on a PC or a Mac, you can drag the images directly into the viewport, especially if you're working in Photoshop. That's the best way to do. So you'll double click here and then open up, let's say this image, and just drag it directly into your viewport, and it will load automatically. We can put it where we want it. We can resize it with this little bounding box, these handles. We can rotate this. If you hold it off to the side, you'll see those two arrows, the rotate arrows, and you can rotate it. I can grab this lower right hand corner, and if you hold shift on your keyboard, it'll basically restrain its properties so that it won't distort. If I don't hold that and I start to move this around, it's going to basically distort the image. So let me hit Command Z and go back. Okay, so some other things. Let's say that I place this and then I want to move it later on. It's on its own layer over here in the right hand side. You can see the layers panel. So with that layer selected, I can go up here to my move tool, and I can move it anywhere that I want in the picture plane. I can also go back and I can edit it. I can go to Edit, and I can go down to all these transformations right here: scale, rotate, distort, warp, And I would suggest just selecting those and kind of play around with what they do. There's also a free transform, so if I click this free transform, that takes us back to that selection that we had when we dragged and dropped it in. So now I can rotate it again. I can hold shift on my keyboard and shrink it or make it larger and then place it where I want. To place it, you can either hit enter on your keyboard or go up and click the check mark, and that will place it for you. Another way to import is to go to File, and in Photopea there's an Open and Place button. So we click Open and Place, and then I can select the image that I want to use. So let's go ahead and select. Let's select. I just grabbed this image. I think this is a different one. Click Open, and it will show up in the viewport, and then I can do the same thing. I can move this thing around, rotate it, and when I'm happy with how it's situated, I can click this little check mark, and it will be sitting here. Now, something about the order of the layers. Let's talk about the order of the layers. So over here, I just dragged in this image called Full Body Compound. That was the last one that I dragged in, so it's at the top of the order. But let's say that I want this Full Body Isolation, that first one, I want that to be on top of this Full Body Compound. I can just drag this layer over here in my Layers panel, and I can move that to the top, and now if you saw in the viewport, it flip-flopped, it switched. So now Full Body Isolation is on top of this other image. So that's one thing you can do with the arrangement of your images. So I'll go back up here to my move tool. Let me move this around a little bit just to kind of spread these out a touch. And let's talk about some different things that we can do with the individual pictures that we bring in to adjust them. Now, there are a lot of collage makers online, and there's plenty of them for cell phones, for social media, so on and so forth, that do very similar things. But one advantage of using either Photoshop or Photopea with this is that it's fully customizable. We can basically do what we want. So if there's a specific look that we want to our collage, we can get that pretty easily. Now, let's talk about layer styles. Let's say that with this the second image here, this Full Body Compound, I want to change its border. I can go down here and I can double click where it says Full Body Compound just off to the side, and this panel shows up called Layer Style. I can also access that through Layer, this Layer drop down. I go to Layer, Layer Style, and right here Blending Options. It's the exact same panel. And let's talk about a couple of things that I can do to adjust how this looks independently, each independent image. A couple of things I like to add are stroke, so I'm going to click stroke, and drop shadow. So I'll click drop shadow here. And with this stroke, what that does is it basically puts like a stroke of paint around the outside of each individual entity or each individual layer. So I'm going to double click where it says stroke, and I can change the color by double clicking this palette. Let's say that I want it to be a dark blue around there. I can click OK, and I can adjust that. I can change the size of that stroke. So as I drag this little bar here up, you can see that the stroke size is quite a bit larger. Let me minimize that just a touch. So let's say that I'm good with that. The size 10, and this color, and we'll leave the opacity all the way up. I hit OK, and it's going to keep that. Some other things that I can do, so again, it's layer, layer style, blending options. Or with that drop shadow, let's go ahead and double click where it says drop shadow, and we can make adjustments now with that drop shadow. And you can go through all of these adjustments and kind of basically see what they do, but I know that I want to distance this a little bit. So as I pull this distance out, you can see that shadow in the background separate my image from the background itself. It gives that illusion that this thing's kind of hovering in space. So I can also change the angle depending on where this thing is in the picture plane. So if I have a light source out front, maybe the shadow would look like this. And if I would have that image a little bit lower in the picture plane, maybe I'd want to move that shadow up to make it look like there's a consistent light source. So let's say that I like this shadow and I like the stroke that I have here. I click OK. And then I can go back into this other layer and I can add the same type of effects by double clicking that layer off to the side. And I can check stroke. And notice that it kept the parameters of what I had set for the stroke with that other image or that other layer, and it basically standardized it for me, so I don't have to go in and adjust that. It stayed consistent. I'll click drop shadow, and it gives me the same type of drop shadow. I may want to adjust the angle to make it look like, again, I have a more, I guess, interesting light source, and it's working with both of those entities together so that it stays consistent. So I'm going to click OK, and then I can just basically bring in any other images that I want to fill up this picture plane. Now let's say that I brought in all these images, and let's say that this template's full of images, and I've got things arranged how I want, but I want to add something to, I guess, convey a message a little bit further with this collage. I can go in and add text. That's one way to do that. So right over here is a text tool or a type tool. I'm going to click that and click on my image. And notice when I clicked the text tool and then I clicked on my image, a little bounding box showed up right here, a little text box, and it also showed up as a layer over here in my layers panel. And I can go in and add text. And let's talk about some different adjustments we can make with that. So let's say that I want to just title this work or demonstrate that this is these are workouts. So I'll type in workouts, and when I start typing, you can see that the text is really tiny in here. So I can select that text and I can change the size of the font right up here with this little drop down. So I can bump the size of the font up. I'll go up to 150, and I think in Photopea you can even type in a larger number. Let's say I type in 200, hit return. So you can make it as large or as small as you want. The font styles are right here, this little drop down, so I can go through and I can actually see a preview of what those fonts will look like by just hovering over the different fonts, and then the one that you select, obviously it'll change down the viewport. So let's go ahead and take this days one, and it changed the style of my font. So I can also use my move tool, and I can move this around. I can go to edit, transform, scale, and I can resize this by grabbing these handles. And let's say that I put it up here, but I want this image to be in front of it. Let me go ahead and check this. I can just take that image, which is right here, and I can drag that above my font. So working with these layers gives you a lot of freedom. So with your collage, let me go ahead and move that back to the top so I can see a little bit better. With your collage, again, I suggest filling up the picture plane, adding some text to it. Let me select that text layer. One last thing that I did forget. I'm going to click the text tool here, and I'm going to highlight that text. If you do want to change the color of the font too, right here is your palette, so you can double click it, go in and select a different color for the font, and we can actually add layer styles to the font as well if you want to go back in after you change the color or change the look of it. Let's say that I can't see this very well, I can still go in here and double click and add some layer styles to it as well. If I wanted to stay consistent with the stroke, I could do that, or let's say I want to adjust that color so that we can see it a little bit better with stroke, and I'll throw a drop shadow in there to stay consistent as well. Couple of tips, like let's say we're going to go ahead and finish this up and not post it to social media. I'm actually going to print this thing out. When you print, depending on how your driver's set, I would use a word of caution. Keep your font, any words that you have, away from the edges of your image, because when you print, sometimes there can be some issues with it getting clipped off. Same thing with the images that you use and you add to the collage itself. Hopefully that gives you some tools to work with in a very simple way, kind of step-by-step, for composing your collage work. And again, I'd suggest filling up your picture plane. Don't make it too busy, but fill things in and keep them away from the edge. So I filled up my picture plane, added some more text, and let's say I'm finished with my work. We go to File and go down to Save as PSD, And that will allow you to either save it to your desktop or download it for print. Another format that you can use is go to File and Export As. And JPEG's a pretty universal format. I'd bump the quality all the way up with it. Click Save. And you can save that to your desktop as well.